Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, I suspect many of you have had kids or have kids right now that go to the University of Texas at Austin, and your money goes there too. Well, our guest today, he represents District 9, that includes West Campus and downtown Austin. So I want you to join me in welcoming our brother in Islam, my friend, Austin City Council member, Zohaib Qadri. I'll share a little bit about with you about this community. So I live across from an AMCC, but I drive 20 minutes to get to this masjid many times a week. And I'll just say that there's something special about the community. There are kind of the most engaged leadership and very high participation from the congregation. Their weekly programming, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but it'll give your city council agenda during budget cycle a run for their money. They had this past Eid al-Fitr, they had 5 Eid prayers, I think. Maybe they had 4 planned and they had to do 5. And, they had standing room only. I don't know if you see what I did there, standing room only. Yeah, tough crowd. Anyway, they had, during Ramadan, they had over 1,000 people for iftar, on the weekend. So a very engaged community, I would say. So I want to first, thank you for being here and spending your Saturday night with us. I'm going to be kind of winging this a little bit because I'm not prepared to be a moderator, but I'll probably stick to the basics and do the good old who, what, when, where, why. So we'll start with the who. So who is Zohaib Qadri? And we would just love to learn a little bit about you.
Great. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. Salam alaikum, everyone. My name is Zohaib Qadri, and I represent Austin on the City Council. Should I have it here?
That's good.
I represent Austin on City Council in District 9, which mentioned was, it has downtown Austin, it has West Campus, but it also has neighborhoods like Mueller, Hyde Park, Cherrywood, Travis Heights, Bolden Creek, Clarksville. It's a city center. And I always like to tell folks, when you think of Austin, you think of District 9. I moved to Austin in 2009 to go to school at UT. I grew up my first few years in Texas, in Victoria, Texas. And I know Brother Hilal's here, who lived in Victoria a long time ago. But it was a community that I was a part of. But initially born in New Jersey to 2 immigrant parents from Pakistan. Lived in New York up until moving to Texas. And we called Victoria home, and I still have family in the area. But I moved to Austin in 2009 to go to school at UT. I think like every other Muslim and South Asian child, I thought I wanted to go into medicine. So I was a bio pre-med student when I started my studies. But one thing that I noticed that was very jarring, that still is an issue, is our homelessness crisis in the city. I noticed, unhoused folks on the drag, which is right across from UT, begging for money and in extreme cases of heat and cold, something that we especially deal with nowadays, people dying. And I couldn't make sense of it. That how in such a rich country, in a rich state, in a rich city, right across from the university, and just a short while away from the Capitol and City Hall, are people suffering to this degree. So I wanted to be part of solutions through policy. So I switched majors and ended up graduating from UT, getting a master's from Texas State and getting a master's from Rice, pushing myself into the advocacy and political government work. And then upon the former president's election, rhetoric of his inspired a lot of folks to do a lot of bad things, and my hometown mosque in Victoria was burned to the ground by a person who was motivated by the president's rhetoric. And from that, I kind of pivoted to more of the electoral political work, working on campaigns, and did that up until I ran for office myself. And I ran and I announced in November of 2021 The election was about a year out, but I knew I needed to be out in the field to do the outreach, but also realizing that Austin had never elected a Muslim to its dais, and knowing that I would have to work twice as hard as a lot of my peers. So we were, alhamdulillah, able to get about 30% of the vote in the November election. We made a runoff, and then we, alhamdulillah, obviously won the runoff. And so I got sworn in on January 6th of 2022, have been on the dais for about 8 months, going on 9. A big tenet of our campaign that we continue to hold true to our time on the official side is housing affordability, because Austin is a city that is going through a housing crisis. And the crisis is truthfully so bad that it bleeds into other cities in Central Texas, and I'm sure Cedar Park is where we're at. Cedar Park is no different. And then also making sure when it comes to things like transit, when it comes to things like homelessness and public safety, when it comes to workers' rights, that we're a council, and respect myself as an elected in our office kind of leads on a lot of these issues. So that's what we've been doing as in our short time in office. A lot of times I think the headlines go towards what's happening in Washington, D.C., or what's happening, not too far from where I work at the Capitol. But local government is so intimate, and it affects your day-to-day life and your loved ones' day-to-day life. If you have kids who go to UT, public safety in that area, transit in that area, the affordability of being able to go to school there and live in that West Campus area, all comes down to the work that's done at City Hall. So that's what we've kind of been working on, and I think that's a quick snapshot of everything.
Thanks for sharing that. I'll share quickly that I, at one point, had political aspirations, and my wife quickly sat me down and asked to pick one, marriage or politics. And I'm proud to say that I'm still happily married. So, but speaking of that, they say there's, behind every successful man, there's a great woman or women, and so that have to support you and sacrifice time and so on. And so if you wouldn't mind sharing who they are and how you manage to maintain balance or attempt to.
Yeah, I think me being where I am is because of sacrifices of so many people, and I'll get to the women, I guess, in my life, but, without my grandparents' initial sacrifice of leaving, I always think about it, they left British India and went to Pakistan, and then shortly after they went to Canada, and then from Canada they settled in New York, and just the struggles they had to deal with. And I think without those initial sacrifices, I'm not here. And so, there's always so much thanks and appreciation to their work. And then obviously the sacrifices of my parents. My mom came to the States with her parents. My father came later on. But just everything they provided for me and my siblings. And, my mom continues to do so. And my dad passed away about a decade ago. But everything that he instilled in myself and my siblings, I'm forever grateful for. But when I was thinking about running for office, the first two people I chatted with was my mom, my mother, because if your mom doesn't support you, then you're already losing your race. And I asked her, what did she think of it, and this and that, and she was very supportive of that. And then the second person I asked, or maybe I asked them at the same time, is what I'll stick to, was my wife. And I had been married for not even a year, and it's a huge sacrifice to run for office. But the sacrifice that your family members take, especially if you're married, your wife, and if you have kids, which I don't have kids yet, your kids take is tremendous. I always tell people that your highs are their highs, and your lows are their lows. And there was a lot of highs and lows during the campaign cycle. So, I don't think, getting from that November 2021 launch to winning the campaign in December of 2022, none of that is possible without the support of everyone, but especially my mother and my wife.
The last one in the who questions for now. Who are some personalities that you take inspiration from in politics and otherwise?
Who are someone, I'm sorry?
Who are some personalities that you take inspiration from?
Yeah, one person that I think did a great job and continues to do a good job in the Austin area is Greg Kassar. He's a former city council member. I think he was elected 3 terms. In his 3rd term, he stepped down to run for U.S. Congress, and now he's a congressman. But I think a lot of the issues that he pushed forward, whether it be housing, whether it be homelessness, workers' rights, I mean, just basic human rights and human dignities that often we take for granted, things as simple as rest breaks and water breaks. It's just that empathy and that humanity is something that I really do admire. For me, it is folks that do work on the local level that, I really do appreciate. We had a team retreat just yesterday, and the former mayor of Austin, Steve Adler, came and spoke to the team for about an hour. And the work that he put into the city for his 8 years, was meant a lot to me. So, in terms of political folks that I look up to, I would say it's those two. I think things that are often said about me in office is, oh, you're like mini Greg, or I guess it's people who are trying to be mean to me. You're mini Greg or little Greg. And for me, I always tell them I'm just trying to be me, and I'm just trying to do a good job and lead by example and push a lot of really important policies and making sure that those who don't have a voice in our city, have that.
Yeah, speaking of Greg, President Modi was in D.C. a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, and Greg has been a good friend to me, and he in protest didn't attend the event. So I mean, he's really kind of aligned with a lot of our priorities as well. Now that we're warmed up, let's get into something meatier. What have you experienced as a Muslim elected official? Have you had to explain if you're Muslim first or American first?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was running for office, I think Austin at times is perceived as a very liberal city and very accepting, and I think there's limits to that. And I experienced a lot of prejudice, Islamophobia, xenophobia as a candidate. And like I said, this is despite running in the city center that is overwhelmingly, if you look at national politics, it's a very blue district. But there was a lot of, you don't look like you're from Austin, to people with that name, that's not an Austin type name. Like, what is that name? To you shouldn't be running, for this seat if you weren't born here. There was a lot of othering that went on. And for me, Austin's the community that I've lived in longer than I've lived anywhere else in my life, and it's my home, and it's where I've grown up. It's where I went to school, and I met my wife, and got married, and put down roots. So, that was always my, to humanize and to tell a story was how I would kind of push back against that rhetoric. I think being in office, I can't say if I've dealt with any Islamophobia. I've definitely dealt with some xenophobia and some people just kind of being nasty, just to be nasty. But I think the thing that I have tried to do is educate my colleagues on Islam. And the thing that I noticed when I wasn't an elected official is at times there would be hate crimes that took place in Austin, and you would have silence from the dais. Not one member would speak out against it or tweet out against it, and that always kind of hurt me. It wasn't the reason that I wanted to run, but it kind of reinforced the need for representation in all forms of government. So what I've tried to do, shortly after getting elected, Ramadan happened, I was fasting. People didn't realize what fasting entailed. They would always offer me gum or water. I said, I can't do that. So I thought that was really, important, talking to them about what Eid is, what the other Eid is, and was really important. We did a proclamation around Ramadan and Eid, and from what I know is the first time in the city's history that there was a proclamation done, towards the Muslim community to commemorate those two very important holidays and events for our community. So I think that's a role that I take, is that I am a city council member who happens to be Muslim, and I think how I go about business and the issues that I look forward, I think my faith kind of guides me in terms of helping those less fortunate, serving with empathy. I mean, a big thing that our office really does care about is the homeless community, and I think that's a very tricky topic here, or in Austin, and maybe it's also in Cedar Park, on how do we actually help that community, a community that is suffering either from substance abuse or mental health issues, a community that is often villainized, and how do we treat that community with care and empathy, and just be very careful and intentional about that. And the downtown area has unhoused shelters, There's a lot of unhoused folks in the downtown area. If you are a student at UT or have a child that goes to UT, there's unhoused folks on the drag. So for us, it's about how do we actually help these people? It's not about just removing them from people's eyesight because they don't like seeing it, because I don't think that's humane or right. It's about how do we actually give them a dignified life in the city.
That's a good segue into my next question. What are some other policy issues besides homelessness that you're currently excited to be working on?
Yeah, I'll go into things that I didn't think would become issues, but became issues, and that I've become, I guess, excited. A month into my time in office, the ice storm happened. And during the ice storm, about a week after the ice storm, there was a gentleman who was on Rainy Street who disappeared. And he was missing for about 10 days. And his family reached out to our office, and we worked with APD and AFD and a bunch of other agencies to try to locate this gentleman. And unfortunately, on day 10, his body floated up on Lady Bird Lake. And after that, there were several instances of people falling into the body of water and days later floating back up. And for those who might not know, Rainy Street is a residential area, but also has a lot of bars and restaurants. And there is a body of water, very much outside of that. If you mix alcohol to walking late home at night, close to a body of water, there's no lighting, there's no fencing, a lot of bad things can happen, and that's what was happening. A lot of people in the community were calling for more policing and saying we need more cops in that area. And I was like, listen, there were cops, in all these instances of people drowning, there were cops hundreds of feet away, and it didn't stop anyone from dying. I think we need to look at investing in infrastructure, right? More cops doesn't necessarily equate to safer streets. So what we did initially was pass a resolution for a Safer Rainy Street initiative, which basically called for lighting on the trail, because there was no lighting in the trail, fencing, signage that told you that after 10 p.m. the trail is closed, halo cameras to kind of monitor it, and then having EMS and park rangers patrolling the trail. And since that, I think overwhelmingly it was on consent. So by consent, it means all 11 members, 10 council members, mayor, all voted for it. And since it's been enacted, there have been instances of people being saved by EMS professionals who were getting too close to the water, or who might have gone on the other side of the fence. So for me, that was very meaningful, that if we can put forward policy that can save a life, and then seeing it actually play out was something very important. So I guess public safety, not necessarily through the lens of, like I said, more cops, but through infrastructure. So I think that's been really important to us. Homelessness is, like I said, it's a huge issue, not only in this city, but I think throughout the state, and it's become a national issue. So how do we actually help unhoused folks, looking at long-term, shelter, and then from there having these folks get the mental health and substance abuse help that they might be suffering from. Housing is a big issue, the housing crisis that we're facing as a city. I think this dais, from the mayor to the council, is very focused on doing right and kind of steering this ship, the right way. And I think the previous council did a lot of good work, including the former mayor, of kind of laying this foundation, and I think we're able to kind of build off of that. A lot of the resolutions that I've brought forward as a council member have had to do with housing, and we're going to continue to do that because the crisis isn't going anywhere, right? I rent in Austin. I've been in Austin for about 14 years. I've always been a renter, and I often tell my wife about it. We are, as in me and my wife, we're closer to being unhoused than we are of being millionaires in this city. Just to kind of put in perspective that, us doing this work is so important, that the council member who represents one of the wealthiest districts in Austin, I can't afford to buy a house in Austin. And I think that shouldn't be the case. Someone with, I've gone to college, I have 2 master's degrees. My wife went to college, she has a master's degree, she works in a hospital. And the fact that we can't do it, and imagine folks who don't have that level of privilege, who live in Austin, how hard must life be? So, my thing is, whether I have 4 years on the dais or 8 years, is to do as much good. And I always tell my staff that a next term isn't promised, right? An election can happen and it could not go my way. So let's take advantage of these 4 years we have. Let's do as much good as possible. And like I said, the housing crisis is always on top of mind. And I would say that the last thing that always comes up is transit. There's a big fight around I-35. Personally, I'm not for that expansion. I see a lot of environmental and equity impacts that would just be horrible for this city for generations to come. So me and a few other council folks have been kind of pushing back against that. Project Connect is, I guess, going to start coming to life. It's not as expansive as I wished it would be, but it's something, and I think that's really important for us as a city. And then also just pushing for more, multimodal types of transit in the city of Austin is extremely important. And then, I don't know, I think smaller issues are things like, I don't want to say they're smaller issues, but they're issues that aren't necessarily as, front page. Workers' rights is something that we're always very concerned about. A lot of labor issues is something that I cared about before I was a candidate, and as a candidate, and now as an elected. So I think that's something that's also is top of mind.
This community, as engaged and participatory as it is, what should or could this community do to be more prepared to participate in local, state, and national politics? This is kind of a big one, kind of an overarching one, but
Yeah.
what sort of advice can you give to the community to prepare themselves to participate more?
Yeah, I think voting is always a good first step. It's astonishing at how many people don't vote. It's always a tagline that people say about, Texas isn't a red state or a blue state; it's a non-voting state, which I think rings very clear. And I want to highlight the importance of certain groups, right? In District 9, the student vote is so very powerful, right? About 50% of the population of District 9 are UT students. And I think if students realize their political power, they can win council seats or help dictate who the next mayor is or a county commissioner. I think likewise, the Muslim community is the same. I think it's a sleeping giant. I mean, the fact that there's 5,000 folks who attend this masjid, where, I normally go to Oasis because it's close to where I live and it's in the district, but there's so many Muslims in that area. There's so many Muslims in Austin. We should be a population that politicians, regardless if it's city council or it's U.S. Senate, are going towards. And I think until we start coming out and voting, people aren't going to realize the potential of this. So voting is always a good first step. The second is to make sure your voice is heard. You can go to the state and testify on good bills or bad bills, but you could also do that at city council, right? The state house is in session once every 2 years for 5 months. Your city council members are working every single month, every single year, all the time. We have council meetings every other week. For the most part, sometimes they're back to back, or sometimes there's a longer gap, but most of the time it's every other week. You can come if you're an Austin resident, if your child goes to school at UT and there's an issue that you're really passionate about that's on the agenda, and you can speak on that item. And I think that's extremely important and impactful, and I think people at times don't realize the opportunity they have to sway a vote on the dais based off of solid testimony. And then my last thing, and not everyone has the luxury to do this, but get involved. That could be volunteering on a campaign. That could be donating. That could be, just going on your social media and talking about a candidate that you really believe in and the community should really get behind. Or, for those who, whether you're, in high school or you're, a grandparent, you could run for office, which sounds ridiculous and crazy, but I think it's extremely important to have faces like ours in public office, right? As great as it was to be the first Muslim elected to city council in Austin, it was also kind of sad that in 2022 was the first year that happened. And to this day, there's not a Muslim elected to our state house from Austin. And we do have 2 Muslims in the state house, but not from Austin. There's not a Muslim who has ever represented us in the commissioner's court. So that means county commissioners, county judge. We've never had a Muslim represent us at the federal level in Texas. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I remember being a kid And when I saw people who looked like us, they were always either represented very negatively, and I always remember my parents watching Seinfeld for whatever reason as a kid, and there was a Pakistani character in that show that I was always shown to be messing up and failing at things, and then eventually he was deported. Or after 9/11, anyone who looked like me was always represented as the villain and the terrorist and all that. And I think that's so sad, and that shouldn't be the case. And whether it's arts and entertainment, whether it's press, whether it's being a journalist, whether it's being an elected official, whatever it may be, I want to see more representation from our community. So inshallah, I am able to win another cycle when that comes up. But after that, I want to see the next people from our community run for school board, run for city council, run for county commissioner. Because when we don't have a seat on the table, that's when nobody cares. And that's the sad truth, but that's the honest truth.
Central Texas is in a drought, and this community prayed Salatul Istisqa, I think a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, last week. I don't know how visible that was, but what are some other opportunities for us to sort of make visible some of the good work that we're doing in the community?
As in what the Muslim community here is doing? I mean, one thing that I've been trying to do during my short time in office, is to do outreach, obviously to folks who live in neighborhoods and certain advocacy organizations and the university, but also going to different houses of worship. So going to the masjids in District 9, but also talking to the Jewish community and the Christian community. So I don't know. I almost feel like it's my job to make sure that outreach is being done. So I know what are they doing? What's lacking? Is there someone to acknowledge that's done a lot of really good work in that community? I guess Cedar Park has its own city council, so I'm not sure who the city council member in this area is, but I would say try to get engaged with your council member. I mean, my general belief is the city council member should be engaged. That's their job. But if they're not doing that, then go to them, right? Set up that meeting, invite them to the masjid, have them meet the congregation, and when there's something, an event happening, when there's a need, I don't know, maybe it's someone who's done really good work to acknowledge that good work. Maybe it's a child who, I don't know, got a perfect score on their SAT and got into 500 colleges. Like, it's important to acknowledge that good work because we are a part of this community. And I think making sure that communication is there is really important.
I think Cedar Park is maybe at large positions, all of them are.
To all your city council members then. So.
Exactly. What about folks in the community that I think our community always struggles with, hey, do we align with the Democrats, with the Republicans? We might align with one for social justice issues and another for maybe conservative moral values and so on. So how does the community sort of negotiate?
Well, I think the good thing about, at least I can't speak of being a federal elected official or state elected official. City council is nonpartisan, right? A lot of these fights that often happen at the federal and state side, those aren't our fights necessarily. I mean, I think it's important. I always say it's important for Austin to protect Austinites. So when there's a lot of overreaching work being done by the state government, I think the city needs to protect its own. But for the most part, with city issues, it's things like I said, like housing, like transit. If your road is bad in front of your house, or you have a pothole, or a winter storm has happened and now you have a live wire in your front yard, like that's a city issue. And that's the work that we do. I mean, after the winter storm that happened this last year, me and my chief of staff, for about 5 days, we were driving around the district like 12 hours a day making house calls. So if people were, they had no power, they were cold, they were sick, they had a live wire, a tree was through their front lawn or through their roof, like we were going to their home, and we were making sure that they were being taken care of. I mean, I can't respectfully, how I align politically is that I align with the Democratic Party, but I think everyone should try to find who's going to fight for me, and if that's Democrats, then that's Democrats. But I think on the city level, everyone should fight for you, because my problem is your problem is my problem. That's how I look at it.
mean, those are all the questions that I had. I don't know if you wanted to add something, and then Mukeeth, we were going to do note cards and written questions, so I don't know if we can have those or not. But anything you want to add?
No, I mean, like I said, I just think it's extremely important for our community to get involved. I think that's I always see a lot of excitement when, I don't know, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib or Congresswoman Ilhan Omar or any other Muslim runs for Congress. There's a lot of excitement and people are donating and volunteering and this and that, and that's great, and I think they do a lot of great work. But it's also important for us to kind of build a bench in terms of having Muslims, and like I said, on school boards and, you know, on city councils and whatnot. We can't just always be so passive, and I think that's unfortunately an issue in the community, or it's that we only care when it's a bigger race. And I think if we come out and we come out unified and we mobilize, I think there's so much good we can do in this city and this state.
So we've got about 9 minutes for questions, so we'll take a few. Go ahead, Brother Tariq.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you for all the work you're doing and for visiting us tonight. I actually am interested in what it took to run your campaign and then what it's actually like serving.
Oh, that's a great question.
Council. You know what I'm saying? And
yeah.
Is it full time? Do you get paid for that, or do you have a job and also do that? And just kind of if you could talk a little bit about your experience.
Yeah.
Both getting elected and then serving now.
Yeah, I think, like I said, initially, the whole process of running for office was so foreign to me because I've worked on campaigns, but I'd never been a candidate before. And obviously, getting that seal of approval from your wife is never a bad thing. But then it was about who's going to be a part of this campaign. So kind of looking at the talent that we had in Austin. Then it was about doing outreach and talking to, I think I had 300-400 individual meetings before deciding to run. I talked to a lot of people that I really respected. I actually, and I would recommend anyone to do this, it actually works. I cold called a bunch of Muslim electeds who don't even live in Texas. I got in contact with Shamus Malik, who was the first Muslim Pakistani elected to Akron City Council. Now he's the mayor of Akron. I reached out to him. I reached out to Sadaf Jaffer, who was a mayor out of Montgomery County, New Jersey, who's now a state legislator out of New Jersey. I reached out to Bushra Amiwala, who is a school board member out of Skokie, Illinois. And I think I reached out to Letitia Plummer, who's a Muslim city council member out of Houston. Because I wanted to talk about what was it like running as a Muslim in your respective area and learning from them, because it's easy to talk to a Greg Kassar or a Wendy Davis, but I don't know, being Muslim and running is a very different ballgame. The experiences that you have are very unique to you. So I did all that, like I said, got the campaign ready. I knew that outside of a certain group of people, I had absolutely no name ID. It was a district of about 100,000 people. The past incumbent, my predecessor, had been in office for 12 years. So I knew it was gonna be a lot of outreach needed to be done. So I think that was the main focus of my campaign. How do we get my name out there? I was everywhere. I think, like I said, it was a big sacrifice in terms of not seeing family as much as I would want to. I mean, there would be times I would leave before my wife woke up to go to work, and by the time I would come back home, she would be sleeping. Like, there were almost days where, outside of seeing her face, like I didn't say a single word to her, and it was very hard to do that. And it's very challenging, like I said, I always felt like I was either failing as a husband, or I was failing as a son, or failing as a brother, and that was very internally very frustrating. But it was a lot of work in that aspect. Campaigns aren't free; they're run on money, which is the most awkward thing to do. I asked everyone I knew that I met ever since ever since I had a phone. Anyone whose number was in there, I called them and I texted them, and I'm like, can you please donate to the campaign? Alhamdulillah, we ended up, we ended up raising, and I looked this up, out of any first-time non-incumbent candidate, we raised the most money in the history of the city of Austin, which that's all because of, thanks to God, and also people who believe in our campaign. So, like I said, the easiest thing that I can say, and I would have, if I could, it would probably take me another hour to explain, but the gist of it is we did a lot of outreach, and we out-hustled everyone else in the field. We were able to, alhamdulillah, get into a runoff. and then we continued to basically do that same work. And I think the runoff was challenging. Our opponent, truthfully speaking, ran a very dirty campaign and made up a lot of lies. But we just stayed on message because we thought that was the best thing to do. We didn't want to give oxygen to things that aren't true, misinformation. And we were like, what do people in Austin care about? They don't care about the dirtiness of politics. That's what turns people off. People care about, is their kid safe at school? Is their kid, able to get to and from home? Is their loved one able to afford to live in the city? And I think that was our messaging. We won. Being in office now, it is a full-time job. I think some city councils are not like that, but Austin is. So I work 5 days a week. I normally get into the office, depending on if it's a council day or if it's a work session day, I get in at 8 a.m. and then I leave whenever the work session or council meeting ends. But normally I get in at 9 and I'm probably out of the office until about 6. If there's any events after, I always attend it, normally have staff that staffs me. If there's weekend events, I do that. But yeah, it's a paid job. We have 5 staffers. Yes, we have 5 staffers. And we actually have internships starting for the fall. So if you are a high school, college student, or if your child is a student, the internship application actually ends 2 weeks. I think your daughter had mentioned it, so if she wants to apply for that. But yeah, it's been great. I think there's challenges, but I always, going back to the sacrifices, I almost feel like I have more time and I'm more, I visit my mom more than I did when I was a candidate. I visit my in-laws more. I visit my wife, and the thing that I love about it, and when I was a candidate, I was often accused of only running to run for something higher, and my response was, well, I love this city. I just want to be here. And I think the beautiful thing about it is that I can, I have these long hours, but at the end of the day, I get to sleep in my own bed and I get to be around my family. Like I can't imagine what it's like to, work and, be a congressperson. And, I talk to Congressman Doggett and Kassar quite a bit, and they're like, I come home every weekend and I arrive on a Friday and I'm out on a plane by Sunday. I think that's miserable. I would never do it. So I'm very happy to be where I am, and I'm looking forward to the next 3.5 years, and then inshallah 4 years after that. I think it's not on. So I think I heard it. I think you were asking, how does the Muslim community help those that are suffering from homelessness? Is that right? Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So groups that I've worked with are groups like ECHO and Community First, Foundation Communities does a lot of great work. Trying to think of others. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great organizations in this. That's actually a really good question. Let me get back to you. That's one thing I've thought about. There have been times where I see a lot of faith-based homeless organizations. Sunrise, ATX is another one. Most of them are of the Christian faith, and I think it would be great for the Muslim community to also show up, especially with, I can think of like New Oasis Mosque being in West Campus, where there's, blocks away, a lot of unhoused folks. So how do they, I guess, pivot into that arena? I think that's a great question. I think that's something that I can ask the homeless strategy officer at the city. Her name is Diana Gray, and I could circle back with you, and I could get your email or your phone number after this. We have time for one more question?
Yeah, one more.
Hey, Islam. Yeah. I think the question, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear, my hearing is so bad. You said, what are we doing to make housing more affordable? Yeah. Yeah. So I'm trying to think of some things we've done specifically from our office. We eliminated parking mandates. I think a lot of people don't realize that like a parking spot costs anywhere from like I think $50,000 to $100,000, and that rent is often the homeowner or the renter kind of takes on that. Eliminating parking mandates doesn't eliminate parking. It just honestly just leaves it up to the market, to the developer, to see how much parking is needed. Like I said, there was a lot of misinformation going on when we brought this up, and people are like, "Oh, we won't have parking anymore. Or there won't be any ADU, parking spots." Not ADU, sorry. Yeah, ADU. Yeah. No, hold on. What am I thinking of?
Affordable unlocked?
No, I'm not thinking about affordable. Parking for people with disabilities.
Oh, yeah, ADA.
Yeah. So that wasn't the case, but it also lessens the burden, on the housing market. Occupancy limits was another thing that we did. There was a weird thing in Austin where unless you're related to someone, there can't be X amount of people living in an apartment or in a home. But that obviously kind of goes after a lot of immigrant communities. Austin has a very large refugee, especially from the Afghani community. After the country fell to the Taliban, there's a large amount of Afghanis living in Travis Heights area in Austin, for example. So it targets people like refugees, just non-traditional households. So that's one thing that we did as an office. But yeah, affordability unlocked, VME2 are some other things that we've kind of put in place as a city. Now, all that being said, with a lot of the progress that we've made, there are people that kind of push back against that. So there's a lot of lawsuits that are in the air. I think something came out on yesterday. There's actually a rally, if you have time, if you would like to, on Monday, I think at 8:30 in front of the courthouse in downtown, on a housing for all type rally. So yeah, there's a lot of work that we've done, but that's to say there's not always pushback, and I think that pushback always occurs from people who either don't like change or are afraid of what that change looks like, right? Austin is a changing city, it is a growing city, and I think we should celebrate that because I think most of us who live here are here because we are attracted to the beauty, the diversity of what we can be as a city. But some people don't like that. Some people, hate what downtown has become, or people don't like the growth that we're experiencing, and that's where the pushback comes. And I think it's important to have a counter narrative and to put forward good policies that push back against that. And the last thing I'll add, I think what the previous council did in laying a really good foundation for us, but this council, and I'll speak at least to the three new people on council, myself, Councilmember Ryan Alter, who represents District 5, and Councilmember Jose Velasquez, who represents District 3, we all ran, a lot of issues were really important, but housing was a big one, right? Acknowledging the crisis that we were in. And I think that kind of guides this diocese's direction in a lot of ways.
What I would add to that, though, is for someone like you who's graduated college, right? Is that what I heard? The community passed a bond, several $100 million worth of affordable housing bonds, and there are rental units and ownership units that are subsidized using those bonds as long as you meet certain income requirements. And so if you're 80% MFI as a single person, 80% MFI, median family income is about $62,000. And so if you fit within that range, then you qualify for a $250,000 two-bedroom home rather than the market rate, which is $550,000, right? And I can direct you to those resources, and the council member can as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you go to, and I always forget what it is, but if you go on our social media, which is, sorry, I don't know what my social media handle is. It's at CM Zohaib. There's an internship posting. And there's a bit.ly that is in the bio, and you could use that to apply. But if you go on our city council's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you can find the link. So there's two internships. There's an internship that's more geared towards like high school, college students, and that's a communications internship. And then there's an internship that's housing policy based. So it's a little bit more high level. So that's geared towards, I don't know if you're a LBJ student or a grad student in another school at UT, a law student, and not just UT. I mean, if you're a grad student at St. Ed's or HT or Texas State, like I encourage any grad student anywhere to apply. But I don't truthfully, my chief of staff kind of wrote it up, but I don't remember the hour requirement, but for the comms internship, I think it pays $20 an hour, and then for the policy internship, it pays $30 an hour. And the application is open until September 8th. So I think that's it.
Okay. That's it? Any more questions? Oh, one more. Last question.
I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
Oh, no, not at all.
So you mentioned transit, which is amazing, and the city is taking the lead. I understand the state creates a lot of problems.
They do.
Creates a lot of problems. I work for a transportation engineering firm, so
Okay.
I know a lot of the trouble you face.
Yeah.
So how hard is it when you have like big projects like Project Connect and transport is related to that?
Yeah.
Creative housing, you talked about meeting those parking requirements, so that can't work without transit. So how much of an issue is when you get these big ideas, these big projects, and state is creating, the capital itself is creating hurdles?
Yeah, I mean, Councilmember, I mean, you mentioned, getting housing and like density and like major transit corridors. Councilmember Harper Madison had an item that passed around that. But we have a state government that often pushes back on a lot of social issues, but they also push back on things on, as you said, on transit. And Project Connect was a big thing. There's a former council member by the name of Ellen Troxclair, who's now a state rep, and she was basically trying to kill Project Connect. And there was an appetite at the Ledge to do that. The mayor went down. The mayor is a former state senator, was in the state senate for about 20 years. So he kind of worked his relationships to save Project Connect. I actually came in handy for that. And there's a reporter by the name of Ryan Otullo, and I ran into Ryan when I was at the Capitol, and he tweeted about me, but he didn't say my name. So I screenshotted that tweet because I thought it was hilarious. But I know a gentleman by the name of Salman Bajani, and Salman is a state rep out of the DFW area. He's a Muslim elected, and he was on a committee where Ellen's bill was. And he was initially going to support the bill to kill Project Connect, as were a lot of Democrats on that committee. And the mayor called me and he said, I don't know Rep. Bajani, and he wasn't in office when I was there, but if you know him, can you talk to him? So I went to the Capitol and I talked to Salman, and I was like, please don't do this. And I told him why the city needed it and what the ramifications would mean if he killed it. So I flipped his vote. He talked to some Democrats, flipped their vote. It very much upset Ellen, and there was a back and forth. Long story short, Rep. Busey, who represents, he's on the state rep here, is he? He is Williamson County. I don't know if he's here though.
I don't know if he's here.
Yeah, I don't know if John Busey's here, but
John Busey? Does John Busey represent this area, do you know?
yeah. Well, great rep though, but he had a point of order that basically killed Ellen's bill. So Project Connect was saved. That being said, the iterations of it we got, I think will do the city a lot of good. But as someone who, I was in Tokyo, I was in Japan for a few weeks, a few months ago. I've gone to DC a bit. I envy really good public transit. Austin is not there. I either walk or take the bus or take the metro when I can. Anytime I go to a soccer game, that's my only way of going to and from, but we're still not where we should be. So while I'm excited about Project Connect, I really do hope, even if it's not in my lifetime, that the city does get this robust transit system in the city.
Oh, thank Brother Zohaib for taking the time to join us, and Brother Fayaz for arranging this visit and being the moderator. It's really inspiration to have second generation Muslims, first generation, second generation, to go into politics. It's very important, and hopefully it was very beneficial for everyone. Jazakallah khairan. Thank you for coming. Assalamu alaikum.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. Yeah, but they should be on the YouTube. We have ICBC, Brushy YouTube. It's on the YouTube. Go there.